Welcome to the Navik Gaming Podcast, where it is our mission to explore the business and future of video games. We bring together the industry's brightest builders, investors, and thinkers to keep a pulse on current events, dissect emerging trends in games, share lessons learned, and have a great time. This podcast is also part of Navik's growing ecosystem, which ranges from free and premium research to consulting and advisory services. For more information, visit www.navik.co. Now, let's jump into the episode.
Hello, and welcome to the Navik Gaming Podcast. I'm your host, Niko Vuori. Today, we are going to be talking about taking Web3 games to mobile. As our listeners well know, mobile gaming, of course, is the 800-pound gorilla in the room, makes up about 2/3 of the overall gaming market by revenue, and of course, a much, much bigger share than that in terms of number of players engaging with that form factor. However, when it comes to Web3 games, games that incorporate NFTs or digital ownership, games that incorporate a tokenized economy, mobile doesn't really feature. Almost all Web3 games are web first or even web only still to this day. And there's at least one very good reason for that. That is the Apple App Store and Google Play Store rules. They have very strict rules on what apps can and can't do as it relates to NFTs and cryptocurrency. And I'm going to actually start this episode by quoting from the Apple rules. They're very similar to Google's rules. And both, by the way, are evolving. So this is a moving target that developers are aiming at. So I'm going to read out the Apple language as it relates to NFTs and apps. So this is a quote. Apps may use in-app purchase to sell and sell services related to non-fungible tokens, NFTs, such as minting, listing, and transferring. Apps may allow users to view their own NFTs, provided that NFT ownership does not unlock features or functionality within the app. Apps may allow users to browse NFT collections owned by others, provided that the apps may not include buttons, external links, or other calls to action that direct customers to purchasing mechanisms other than in-app purchase. End quote. That's a lot. That's a mouthful. But I'm just going to recap that real quick. So if an app wants to integrate NFTs, it can, but it has to use in-app purchase to facilitate purchasing of those NFTs. No crypto, no third-party sites. And of course, there is a 30% tax associated with that, which we all as game developers know and love, right? The NFTs also cannot unlock anything special inside the app, no functionality, and the app cannot point to an external site for purchasing of the NFTs. Those are the three kind of main points here. And at least in my opinion, that's pretty limiting for a developer. Kind of goes against a lot of the ethos of Web3, and it really makes it hard for a developer to incorporate NFTs that have in-game value, air quotes, value here. So the big question is, can NFTs and crypto be integrated into a mobile app natively and still make for a compelling gaming experience? That's the big question we're going to answer, or try to answer today. And to do that, we have an absolutely masterful panel of experts who have shipped into the App Store, are in the process of shipping to the App Store, and who are observing the entire ecosystem from up on high. So first, I'm going to introduce our guest. We have Anil Das-Gupta, co-founder and co-CEO of First Light Games. First Light shipped Blast Royale, which has NFT integration, into the App Stores late last year. And so he has had a front row seat into navigating the App Store rules and figuring out how to make this work. Anil, thanks for being on the pod.
Thanks for having me.
Next, we have Benas Baltramiejunas, co-founder and CEO of Block Games. They have a title called Shadowpoint, which is similarly integrating NFTs, but it's not yet live. It is in private alpha, I believe, and has a go-live date of Q2 2023. And so he is presumably right in the middle of navigating all of these rules and what it means to be a Web3 game on mobile. Benas, thank you for being on the pod.
Excited to be here.
Awesome. And then finally, we have Chris Akhavan. He recently joined Magic Eden, which alongside OpenSea, of course, is the top NFT marketplace. He is their chief gaming officer. And so he has a unique perch from which to observe Web3 gaming as an ecosystem, not just an individual title, not just navigating like, how do I build this game, but actually seeing what the entire group of developers that are trying to ship on mobile, trying to do Web3 things natively. So excited to have him here. Chris, thank you for being on the pod.
Thanks for having me, Nico. Good to see everybody.
All right. So that was a mouthful there. This is what happens when you have 3 guests on the pod. So long intro, but we've got that out of the way. Let's dive into the episode. And so I'm going to start with the first question here, just a little bit of background on our 2 games in development here. So Anil, let's start with you. Tell us a little bit about what is the game? How does it incorporate NFTs or other Web3 elements? And then how were you able to, I presume successfully, because you're live, navigate the App Store rules and get product to market, hopefully in a way that you're happy about. You didn't have to compromise too much. And then we'll go to Benas, and then we'll talk to Chris a little bit about kind of ecosystem stuff in a bit. Anil, over to you.
Sure. Let me tell you, it was with difficulty and we had to compromise a lot, but we'll come to those 2 points in a second. So how does the game work? So our game is a top-down battle royale game. Everyone's played battle royale before. Our game is 30 versus 1, 4-minute loop. You play it that way. Where we put NFTs in is that our game is kind of like a deck building game meets a battle royale game. So if you played Magic the Gathering, I was a right nerd. I used to play that game when I was a teenager. I used to love, sort of Unlimited and Revise and things like that. Is you build your items, then when you come into the game, those items are going to appear in order. So there's like a kind of meta layer. So something we wanted to do from the kind of gameplay side is make it compelling, that it's not just kind of collectibles or cosmetics that you see in a lot of other games, but there had to be like a real kind of purpose. Not to make it pay to win, but maybe to customize your build. So you could have, let's say, a sniper build. So you might then, at an NFT, I buy a sniper rifle. I buy an amulet that increases my sniper rifle's accuracy. I build some armor that allows me to tank melee hits, this kind of thing. Now, when I come into the game, when you go around the map and you loot, those items are going to come out in the order that you put them in, and you can play it that way. So that's the kind of gameplay purpose of why we were attracted to NFTs and why we thought we put it in. We thought it was a kind of a cool idea. And, for myself, I happen to, I own, for example, the card Time Walk, which is like worth a lot of money now in Magic the Gathering. And I remember when I was a kid, I spent like $200 to get that card just because I thought it was cool. I couldn't even use it in tournaments. So, I've kind of been through a thing and I knew the physical to digital application. So that's sort of how it works in the game. How we've got through the Apple sort of submission was where a real palaver, I have to say. We kind of did what's called the Thetan Arena route. So I think I need to give Wolf Fun Entertainment in Vietnam a lot of credit because they were just the first ones who really achieved this. So in their game and in our game, and as per the Apple rules that you've mentioned at the start of the show, they actually rejected us on several of our reviews for saying that the NFTs that you could bring into the game, you couldn't get in the game any other way. You had to have the NFTs. I will say one thing that's quite interesting as an anecdote is that in our entire app description, we do not mention NFTs of any kind. We didn't even touch it. And yet somehow they knew that it was connected, which made me very suspect as to how they would know that. My feeling is they have a hit list of certain projects and they're watching out for them. Because I even asked them in the review, I was like, where are the NFTs? There are no NFTs in this game, playing dumb kind of thing. And they were like, don't you try it with me, young man. We know what you're doing. So, okay, we got around it. So the way that we did it is that you can also get the same items in the game, but it's important to know that those items are not NFTs. And I think this is something that not everyone understands. So you can essentially get that same sniper rifle that would be an NFT in the game via in-app purchase. In our game, it's via a loot box, but it doesn't have to be a loot box. But that item is not an NFT. It's tied to the individual's account. So I couldn't send it to you, Niko, through MetaMask or anything like that. But functionally, the item is exactly the same. It can be upgraded, it has the same sort of facilities, and it doesn't block any content. So that means that anyone can come into the game. They don't need to understand this side. They can play the game. And I have to say, I'm sure Ben has got a similar kind of approach, but we wanted the game to not have any gating whatsoever. That anyone should be able to play the game. The game's got to be fun first and foremost. Like, we're all like experienced game makers, and that's kind of our pride at stake. So you can do that way. And then the idea being that the NFTs, if you were to purchase them, then you own your own items. You can choose specifically the item that you want. You can buy, sell, and trade it. So hopefully that kind of gives like a TLDR of what we try to achieve. But I mean, you asked us, what compromise did we have to make? Well, of course, there's a huge compromise, right? And really what we want is we want people to be able to open the marketplace inside the app. Now, we built our own custom game marketplace, again, a bit similar to Thetan Arena. It's called the Blast Hub. And we've made it as kind of like a companion to the game. It also has things like leaderboards, streams, tournaments, that kind of thing. And in an ideal world, we wanted that the player could access that in the app. They could do all the kind of transactions. They'd be able to pay. In our case, we're using Matic. We're built on Polygon. We haven't listed our token at the moment, given that Crypto Winter has been here for about the last year. But we wanted to prove it out and get it working. And I think, the reason why we launched so early, even though we compromised, is that I really believe in learning as fast as possible. I think this is an extremely fluid world, and I don't pretend to know all the answers, but when you try things, you can see if it's working or it's not working. So that's one of the reasons why we even decided to go this way in the first place. I can say that when we did this, my LinkedIn actually absolutely popped off, as did my Telegram, with everyone asking like, how are you doing it? Let me know, what are the details. So that's why I'm happy to share, because I think that's Web3. It's all about a decentralized community. And I think, if one game wins, I think all the other games are going to start doing quite well as well. So I think that's important. And thank you for having me on the show, I must say. So there was that aspect. So yeah, and I will say as well, like, I don't want to ramble too long, but then we have noticed, though, that means that lots of people can play the game. There's lots of people who don't even know that it's a crypto game. They just play the game, they have fun, which is cool. And then there's people who find out about that stuff later, and then they kind of engage with it. And I think something that was very interesting to us, and this is one of the reasons why we wanted to get out so early, is that there is this assumption, right, that like at the moment, people who understand the blockchain and Web3 is like a very niche audience. And there's this belief that in the future, it will become commonplace and many people will use it, and it would just be a part of life. Just like free-to-play games came along after premium games, and people didn't think it would be a thing, but now it's the thing. Right. And so in our own community and launching the game this way, we have seen that happen. So we've seen people that come into the game and first are like, a crypto game. Why did you do that, dude? Why don't you just make the game as it is? Right. There's nothing wrong with it. And then they start learning about the crypto and they're like, wow, this is actually really cool. You can do all this stuff that you couldn't do before. Right. Now, it's very hard to get them there because there's so many steps in the way. But the fact that we've seen this is like one of the reasons that makes the team like most motivated. And I think that should make everyone in Web3 motivated. That it's like, okay, we've done it on mobile, but I think it's across the board that like you can get there. Just unfortunately, there's a lot of barriers in the way. And I do have to say that I feel like both the platform holders are not, helping us, because, what's the reason why they're doing this? Is it's because they want their 30% tax? Like, I get it, right? They've built these walled gardens. They want to take their piece. And really what the NFT side is doing is it's not allowing that, right? It's allowing us developers to fight back a little bit, right? And, we can take the take. But I think it's kind of sad because, games as well, like with us, when you buy it on the marketplace, is that a percentage of every transaction is actually going back into the treasury, which means that the project can kind of sustain and do more things. And that's kind of been denied from us by paying this tax. So, there's that kind of aspect to it. So look.
Hey, Neil, can I ask a quick follow-up? I think it'd be kind of interesting to double click on, which is, you said if you buy something in the game through in-app purchase, those items are not on chain. Is there a path for those items to become on chain? So you mentioned like users might kind of migrate over time to being more comfortable with Web3. So I'm just imagining if my path into Blast Royale, I start as a normal mobile gamer, I make some in-app purchases, say I buy a gun. Can I later on move that gun to be something that I actually put like a mint on chain and have more ownership on and take to the secondary market? Is there like a path for that?
Great question. I can see why this guy got invited onto the podcast. At the moment, we don't do it that way. That is a very good way. I can tell you that anecdotally, I know of a number of other solutions that other people are working on. I know that some people are making an NFT marketplace in the game that just Apple takes their 30% transaction, but you are buying a specific NFT. We're not doing that in our case. It's just the same functionality. The disadvantage of doing that is that with the NFT is that then, NFTs, most companies are making their revenue on the, sharing rights or the resale rights. And then if you've got the royalty fees, if you've got that plus another 30%, that's so much being taken out. And that's going to really hurt your monetization, which unfortunately is needed to sustain the project. But I do know some people that are working on that. What we are thinking of doing is maybe a bit of a different way, which is that we have things like a blast pass or seasonal things or rewards. And it could be that if you engage with the game for long enough, you will get an NFT and then you'll be able to go to our hub and then you'll be able to get that NFT for free that way. That's something that we're thinking about, but we don't have implemented in the game just yet. The idea there being that we would, try to move people over there. I get what you're saying. You could say the different argument is why not just keep people in the app the whole time, which is, I think, what the platform holders want, and just abide by their rules. But we're not really fans of that right now, but we may change our kind of thinking on that depending on what happens. I mean, again, as I said, it's like a fluid situation. My suspicion is that as time goes by, things will be relaxed a little bit or some sort of compromise be done. I think at the moment, people are kind of they're really mindful because you've got things like the SEC looking into things in America, and they just don't want to make something that could be a huge own goal. So they're just doing things like really, really sort of like tight. But I think, to be honest with you, I suspect regulation is going to come into crypto probably this year in America, and I got a feeling that when things like that happen, it will open the doors a little bit. I don't think it will be as nice as people in Web3 want it to be, but what I will say is that once the rules are understood, then it's easier to navigate around them. Whereas right now, it's like building a house on quicksand kind of thing, right? Is it going to stay stable or is it going to melt? So, yeah, sorry, hopefully that answered your question.
Thank you.
Yeah, that was fantastic. Excellent. So we have a lot to unpack there. We're going to get into details for sure. But let's go to Benas here and get a little sense of background of his game, Shadowpoint, right? What is it doing? How is it integrating NFTs? And how are you navigating? How are you finding the navigation of the App Store rules as you are preparing for launch?
Sure. So I think Anil already made that map. So we have to follow the success cases because we don't really have a lot of them yet in the market. But coming back to our game, we are still yet in a closed alpha. So we have been developing for the last year in stealth. The game is Shadowpoint. It's an action RPG multiplayer game built on the Polygon blockchain. And we are taking some inspiration to the game from Diablo, from RPG style gaming experiences, as well as mechanic experiences from Clash Mini with unique resets, which take place on a weekly basis. And players get to create their avatars in the gameplay. They get to then explore different worlds through PvE, PvP gameplays with their peers or across NPCs, and having to survive the Shattering event, which is the unique cataclysmic event, which we call, which resets the entire game on a weekly basis. And the approach from the players is to try and survive the Shattering event by trying to compete over limited NFTs, which are distributed throughout gameplay, because those NFTs get to transfer into the next season, while the rest of your resources basically get to convert into in-game resources, which give you a bit of a boost, but NFTs carry over. So our approach was from the beginning, let's create a fun, engaging gameplay, which can be published on App Store and Google Play more as a game, which people wouldn't really need to have NFTs to play, as that game would be simply playable without any NFT mechanics within them, but try to include some mechanics and lore as inspirations, which would try and convert majority of the players nicely into the whole Web3 world. And this was our approach, to try and bring the game, which some of the in-game assets would be rewarded as NFTs, because from our approach, we saw an opportunity here that we can change the narrative as mobile game developers. Instead of just aggressively monetizing that same user base, trying to monetize as much as possible while we're in our game, let's try to make some of the NFT assets, some of the in-game assets as NFTs, and reward them for free, because that suddenly changes the narrative from the gamer's perspective, because gamers are suddenly receiving something which has a monetary value. And that thinking can really shift a lot towards your gaming metrics, since you are giving back something, not only taking away. And with that approach, we are right now building out the gameplay. So NFT assets are multiple items in our game, but mainly these are heroes, which are cosmetic, plus we have some rune assets, which are gems, which you put into your gear to strengthen up your gameplay. And the approach here is that each season you run, you will receive different assets as NFTs, but your meta might require you to switch or trade those assets with other players, because you might have a rune which gives you a boost for one ability, but that other player has that specific rune which you need to trade. So incentivizing players to join in the trading experience and to participate in exchanging those assets from season to season as you progress in your game. So with that in mind, we are still not yet through the App Store and Google Play gates. We're still there yet to see what roadblocks we might have. But from the trading experience, we've made it, again, very similar to how Anil and First Light Games did, was leave everything outside gameplay. So in the gameplay, reward assets as NFTs. By the way, not call anything NFT in the games. In the gameplay, rename NFT assets as digital collectibles, and just be rewarding them for free. And if the players are wanting to explore that whole Web3 world, they can do that. But it's up to them to figure out. So that onboarding experience is available in written forms on social platforms, Discord, socials, mediums, but that kind of like pathway is for them to discover. And once we are in there, then we jump into Magic Eden to trade those assets. Since we thought through that if you will be discovering the Web3 part, like you'll want to exchange those assets then on marketplaces where you have the liquidity. And for us, main decision was, let's not build our own, because it will be hard to, it will be hard to sustain the liquidity perspective, but also will be easier just to connect them into OpenSea or Magic Eden, where right now trading happens. And based on where NFT marketplaces are moving, with gaming coming along, I think we will see more of such cases coming along from game devs. So yeah.
Perfect. Thank you for that. And then just a quick note, what chain are you building on?
Polygon. So
Polygon
we're building
as well.
On
Okay.
Polygon. Yes.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah.
You guys are both on Polygon.
Yeah. Perfect. Okay. All right. So that's in progress game. Sounds like you've not got through the hoops yet. Hopefully you will get through the hoops. So we'll see what happens. Chris, I want to hear your thoughts on, we've heard from Anil and Benas in the individual developer level, and kind of like, here's how we're integrating NFTs. Here's how we navigated it. Here's where we're going to talk about kind of compromises a little bit further as we get further into the episode.
Yeah.
But what are you seeing in terms of the high-level trends at the ecosystem level? What are developers running into? How are they navigating those App Store rules in order to get their product to market in the best possible way?
Yeah, I think you've heard really good examples here on this panel from Anil and Benas, right? Like, and it's pretty consistent with what we're seeing across the broader mobile gaming space as studios try to figure out how do you implement Web3 hooks in a way that's compliant and also like a good user experience. And in general, we're seeing actually like a lot of movement around this whole free mint meta, where instead of trying to monetize the user base upfront, you're actually giving them free value and building this really strong cohort that is going to become a passionate believer in your game and supporter and building that community with you. And like I know, like in the traditional free to play game space, which I spent about 12 years in, kind of early days of the App Store through to present, modern live operations driven free to play. We always talk about this golden cohort, but in Web3, I think there's like this ability to create this just ultra golden cohort, right? Because you're creating these communities of people that you've given some real value to up front, and that level of passion I haven't seen before in kind of regular free to play. And so I think the folks on this panel and others in the space are doing a really good job of leveraging that and using things like free mints to build that community. Starting to actually introduce NFTs through more of a reward mechanic. I think actually, if you look outside of the gaming space, a lot of people drew inspiration from how Reddit rolled out NFTs, right? It was a similar idea where they introduced these free avatars and they called them digital collectibles. And then behind the scenes, they were actually minting these on Polygon, right? And so they eventually opened up this pathway that if you wanted to get more involved in the actual asset that you own, and let's say you want to take it out and trade it on a marketplace like Magic Eden, they give you the ability to take control over that asset by transferring it to one of your own controlled wallets. So I think a lot of the people in the game space took note of that experience, because if there was ever an NFT hating community, it was probably most prominent on Reddit. And so the fact that Reddit was able to introduce digital asset ownership to that community in a way that they actually really embraced, got really excited about. You can check out, there's a forum or a subreddit called Avatar Trading, where it's basically like this whole community of people that discovered they own these avatars and they can actually trade them on open marketplaces. And because they came in through that free and sort of reward loop, they feel really positively about the experience. And I think, mobile game developers have done a really good job of kind of building on that strategy in how they're introducing these Web3 components. And the great thing about that, lastly, I'll say, is that that's fully compliant with the App Store guidelines, right? You're totally allowed to give things away for free. Apple and Google are primarily concerned about how you sell things and making sure that in-app purchase is part of any kind of sale process. But the power of these free NFTs is totally wide open for folks to leverage.
Okay, so I have a question. Really, this is for Anil and Benas as the devs here. Like, why are you building on mobile? Like, you know the rules are tough, right? You know that it's hard to integrate NFTs. You know that I think Anil, you mentioned quicksand. And I'm a game dev myself, so yeah, like building on quicksand is rarely a great idea, or at least it's an idea that is painful at times. So I'm curious, if you wanted to integrate NFTs and digital collectibles, or however you want to talk about them, why didn't you just stick to building on web? What made you choose to go native mobile and then navigate the App Store rules and the 30% tax? Why don't we start with Anil on this one? Because obviously you shipped already. So very, very curious to hear, like, what was the thought process behind doing this? Because presumably you started building quite a while ago, when the rules were even less certain, right? And they have been evolving, as I alluded to in my intro. They have been evolving over time. They now mention NFTs in the guidelines, right? Which wasn't even true, probably a year or two ago, right? So very curious to hear what made you want to jump. When did you jump into this, actually? When did you make the decision? What were the rules at the time? And why on earth did you decide to go down that path, knowing presumably that you were in for a world of hurt? And Benas, I'm going to have the same question for you in just a second here.
One, because we're somewhat masochistic and we like the pain, and we're not afraid to try on these big challenges going forwards. But, quite honestly, there's like 6.92 billion smartphones in the world. That's like 86% of the world's population. Many of the team have worked on successful games in the past, and this will probably sound quite arrogant, but it is actually true. It's like when you make great games, you want as many people as possible to play them. Like, that's like the thing that gets you up in the morning, right? Like when people say, like, so I worked on Street Fighter 4, for example, right? So a lot of people, even to this day, that game's like 10 years old, they'll still be like, oh my God, that game meant so much to me and stuff like that. I'm a Street Fighter fan myself, so imagine actually working on that, right? That was like the love that was put into making that title. So, actually going to as many people as you possibly can is really appealing. And you could say that, like, going web browser and stuff, you can also reach a lot of people, but it's nowhere near the same amount of volume, right? Literally, you look at anybody who's walking, right? And that's like a potential customer if you have mobile. So that was the big reason, I think, for targeting that way. And also the kind of like mainstream thing, like, like Chris and probably like Ben as well, like, I'm a free-to-play veteran, right? I actually started working in console premium. And I remember I worked on this mobile game, and it was the Smurfs Village, and this game like blew up, right? And I remember the team that was working on it, like, nobody believed in free to play. They were all like, this is the stupidest idea we've ever heard. Yeah, it works in Asia. It's never going to work in the West. No one's going to pay $69.99 for 3,000 Smurf berries. Just not going to happen. And then this game gets #1 in the App Store. It's making like $1 million a day. And I had to go to my Japanese boss and be like, I'll do the harakiri. Just give me the sword right now, because you're right and I'm wrong. And that's a lady called Midori Uasa. So she's like really was a pioneer of that in the West. So I think it's like when you see that, you realize that, like, how does free to play work? It works by like getting as many people as possible, and then you monetize a volume. And so I think the same thing with Web3. And, that's the thing that really appealed to me. And I think like the really big gains and the people that are in the space this early, like, surely that's the winning thing to look at. Like, it's funny, actually, I think like projects in general, there's different routes they go down. Some people are really sort of like crypto native focused. They're about this small amount of people that have extremely high wallets and monetizing off that way. And listen, that could be a very successful strategy. It might even be more successful than the strategy that I've outlined. But I believe that if you can reach the mainstream and get like a huge volume, then the winnings there will be absolutely gigantic. And I want to figure out, well, not just me, but the entire team wants to figure out how to do that. So yeah, one is just trying to get our game as many people to play as possible, because we get off on that kind of thing. And second, because we think that the win, if you could do that, is really worth it. That was our motivation.
One of the things that we 100% agree. One of the things that we talk about internally in our team is thinking about kind of the payer conversion funnel. And so obviously, you want that maximum huge, top of funnel where it's free to play. There's no cost to trying it. Download the app, it's a thumbprint, whatever. In you go. And 97% are probably not going to pay, and that's fine. Then you have your in-app purchase conversion, which is, your I don't know if it's still 3%, but like 3% being kind of like the, okay, if I can get 3% conversion, that would be amazing. And I can build myself a nice big business from the billions of addressable audiences, or, billions of addressable players that are, your potential audience. And then, at least this is how I think about it. I'm curious to hear if you guys agree or disagree. There is almost like a third layer of conversion. Some percentage of your 3% is going to turn into, a crypto conversion, essentially. And arguably, there's no proof for this yet, but arguably that conversion could be a much higher value, right? You're not just converting for, 99 cents or $9.99 or whatever. You might be converting for $1,000 or $10,000 or $100,000 potentially. Is that how you guys think about it as well? That's a model that I've developed for myself, thinking through like, okay, why go for mobile? Well, you go for mobile for the mass market, right? Anil, 100% agree there. Then you've got your payer conversion, and then you've got your crypto conversion. Is that the right way to think about it? Is that something you guys think about as well?
I can just chime in on because part of why I got excited about Web3 gaming was exactly kind of the stuff you're talking about in terms of how it could ultimately impact business outcomes, right, for game developers. And I think I agree with what you're saying. I do see this big opportunity where these Web3 hooks can deepen the engagement with your most valuable players, your spenders. Because they're going to feel like this bigger sense of ownership to the game. And I think over time, we're going to see that play out in stronger retention, stronger conversion, and so on amongst the paying audience. But I'd say just as importantly, I also see this huge opportunity for all these users that the free-to-play space always just calls non-spenders, to bring them into the actual value creation process, right? Like we talked about free NFTs. Imagine a lot of those going to these really passionate, what would traditionally in the free-to-play world be called non-spenders. All of a sudden now this community is highly invested in your game and is going to help drive user acquisition for you and drive a stronger community. And by being, I guess, good shepherds of these assets they own, they're actually going to create real value for the game economy as well. So I think there's this huge opportunity for Web3 to convert this entire pool of the other 97% of players that don't spend any money and actually put them inside the value creation economy.
Yeah, I love that. And for those of you who are listening and not watching on YouTube, there was violent nodding of heads amongst the rest of the panelists. So it seems like there's some agreement there in terms of what this could unlock. I'm going to come back to you, Benas, on the why mobile question, because again, you're in the thick of it. You haven't yet gotten approved. Good luck. Fingers crossed, toes crossed for you. What made you choose the mobile path? Why not just go to web? Why not go for, the world where you can make any game design choices you want? You can have anything at all you can dream up of as a game developer, you can do on open web. So why go through the hoops of mobile?
Sure. So I think a couple of things. Our background for the publisher and for the studio which is behind the Shadowpoint game has been mobile gaming. So the studio started with free-to-play back in 2010 and then never looked back. So mobile gaming was primarily the segment which we were focused, and that was the main core knowledge base which was coming from. So that was a bit of a natural transition for us. But when we looked into all of the new Web3 games popping up, of course, Axie and then all others, we were all primarily focused on, like GameFi, which we like to call, like, it wasn't that much about gameplay as much as about earning aspects and gambling aspects, which made us think that there was an opportunity, and I think still there is a lot of opportunity for studios to enter mobile gaming segment and try to bring Web3 experiences which are tied together with exciting and fun, engaging gameplays. And coming back right now to both points which Anil and Chris mentioned, right? So firstly, like, mobile gaming currently accounts for over 3 billion mobile gamers worldwide. And this is mass market, which Web3 gaming hasn't really seen yet their moment in, and we're still yet to see what that moment looks like. Plus, once you integrate some of those NFT assets into gameplay through the angle that you make some of the assets as NFTs, you're suddenly inviting all of those non-spenders into your network, into your gameplay. They're all vested from the monetary perspective. They hold something which might be worth some value from a perspective on how our players see that, and that changes fully the narrative. Not only if you're able to improve your underlying performance metrics, but you can come out with totally new, interesting models, which then can appear outside of your game. You're moving away suddenly from just monetizing your existing player base and trying to think of where I can get more players into the same model by using pay-to-win mechanics to monetize that. But you're giving back, and like if you give back some of those assets for free to the players might create a guild, and we are creating additional experiences on top of your gameplay. They are creating additional entertainment on top of the entertainment which you're creating, and I think that's what makes it really exciting to try and unlock, which makes us one of the early studios, not yet published, trying to publish a Web3 mobile game into market.
Love it. Yeah, I mean, that's one of the things that gets me excited about Web3. Is it just unlocks these new types of player and not even non-player behaviors. We had Quinn Campbell from Sky Mavis on an earlier episode, and it was right after Sky Mavis had published their, I think they had like 11 or 12 player personas or ecosystem personas, and of those 12, like 8 weren't even players or something like that, right? I'm probably getting the facts a little bit wrong here, but it was remarkable how many folks they had who were part of the ecosystem who weren't actually playing the game, but were incredibly valuable to Sky Mavis, to the overall experience. There were force multipliers for the players as well. And that's really quite unique, I think, in Web3. And that's one of the things that gets me excited as well. So that kind of leads me to a question, which is, given how, as gamers and game developers, lifelong, presumably for all of us, we can see the excitement of what Web3 unlocks, what NFTs and digital ownership, unlocks, tokenized economies potentially unlocks. Why are Apple and Google making it so damn hard, right? I think, Anil, you alluded to the fact that there aren't really the rules yet in place. Should the rules apply to games? I mean, we're like, unless you're actually building a Ponzi, we're making games, we're making entertainment. We're not trying to create, a security, right? Like, even if we had a tokenized economy, it's presumably for the vast majority of game developers, you're doing it because you're making the game more interesting. You're creating these new consumer behaviors that have nothing to do with, GameFi, or financial motives. It's really about making the game more fun ultimately. So, long-winded question there, but what is it about games and these NFTs in games and tokenized economies that Apple and Google feel like they need to put these rules in place when really it's just a different way of playing a game, unlocking new behaviors? I'll open up to anybody who wants to take that one, because it kind of baffles me a little bit why the rules are. I mean, I get the 30% tax thing. I get it, right? Yes, that's the obvious and easy answer. But I feel like the rules go much further than that. So that's really the question. Is like, why make it so hard? Why put these hoops in place?
I mean, I think it does ultimately come down to in-app purchase, right? Like, and maybe I'll expand beyond just the 30% thing. Like, I think there's a couple things that you noted in the guidelines earlier. Like, for example, that you can't unlock functionality through NFTs. And so, for example, in my mind, I think what they're trying to protect against is, let's say Netflix puts out an NFT that's a Netflix subscription, and all of a sudden you just connect that NFT to your account and circumvent, in-app purchase somehow. And so I think it's fundamentally just trying to protect against various use cases where effectively the in-app purchase mechanisms could be circumvented one way or another. I don't think there's really any agenda other than that. I mean, I think it's actually really encouraging to hear that they put clear guidelines around NFTs that didn't just say, oh, you're not allowed to do NFTs. It just said, if you're going to do NFTs, you have to use in-app purchase. And you can't do anything that's kind of like going to circumvent all the standard rules we've always had for how you have to use in-app purchase. And if you read the guidelines, I don't think there's any unfair treatment here with regard to NFTs, because the same rules apply to just processing payments through a credit card, right? I haven't seen any rule here that only applies to NFTs but doesn't apply to just doing direct payments of any kind. So that's what ultimately makes me think there's not really any agenda here other than your standard, make sure everyone uses in-app purchase the way they're supposed to use it. And like, fortunately, there's now like freedom to use, whether it's crypto payments and NFTs or it's using your own credit card processing through a website. I mean, fortunately, there are now pathways to explore both of those things.
Yeah, I think to add, there's also like refund policy, right? So as Chris, you've mentioned, like Apple and Google, right? We have delays on payments, which are then being driven back to studios and publishers. And refund policy is at the middle of this, which then once you have NFTs integrated, sold outside of the game, it's a bit of a gray zone, which yet still has to be figured out from the policy perspective. So I think we're taking it slow. We're definitely seeing the opportunity here, and of course, from the platform play, we want to sustain their revenue share, but we also see the opportunity. It's coming. You want it or not. So I think we will see more of those policies evolving over time, or maybe even some infrastructure being pushed out by App Store or Google Play.
And given the recent SEC, crackdown on staking, and presumably there's more to come still. Obviously, FTX still yet to play out the fallout from that. Do you see the rules getting more strict or less strict? And maybe this is for Anil, because you've actually been navigating these rules for perhaps the longest of all of us. Given that you've already shipped, right, and obviously you've been building the game for a longer period of time. What have you seen happen regarding the rules? Have they been getting more or less strict, and where do you see them going from here, given the current regulatory environment?
They've definitely got more strict, because when we first submitted, there wasn't the rule about you couldn't gate features from your game up. That actually happened the week that we submitted, and luckily we don't have any of that functionality in the game. But that was quite a change, and shows you that, you can be rugged by Apple just like you can be rugged in crypto too, it seems, when you're not so sure what's going on. So they're definitely getting wise to that. So I think it is going to get stricter, but at the same time as it's getting stricter, it's also like it is creating like a framework, which then means that people can go through it and it'll be more understood. I do ultimately think that Chris called it out, that I do think it is just down to revenue, to be totally honest. I think you can already get the Binance app on your phone. You can already buy, trade, sell crypto on your phone. So I don't think it can have anything to do with that aspect of it. It's just that if you can then start spending crypto in your game, then they're not seeing a penny of those transits. And that's why, for example, StepN, got taken down for a similar reason. Like, they managed to sneak a marketplace through there and it got taken out. And I've seen some other apps that have something similar. So I think it will, at the start of the show, I said I thought it would actually get more lenient over time, but I think that will be the second stage. I think first they'll play this safety card, which I understand. Like, to give like another example in a totally different space, like Nintendo was so slow to having online play in their games, even though you had Xbox Live absolutely killing it from the original Xbox. And the reason why is because they have a brand, and they were like we can't have people getting taken advantage of online and things like this, that the reputation is not worth it for our system, even if we lose sales. So they waited, and then eventually they were like, okay, now it's probably about time that we do it, and they kind of did it that way. So I think there will be an element of that. If you're like multi-billion-dollar corporations, then I do get that you would play the safety route rather than just going for a high risk. But at the same time, it is a bit double dipping, because they definitely have allowed certain things already. And as you said, and I totally agree with your statement, Niko, about, gaming, and our aim is just to make a great game, right? The other thing is got a secondary to it. Gaming is a business fundamentally, right? If the game doesn't make money, it's not going to sustain, and no one can play it anymore. So, that's really what we're trying to achieve here. But yeah, to answer the question, I think it's going to get stricter before it gets more lenient. And I think it will only get more lenient once, to be honest with you, I don't think it will happen for many years, because I think it's got to take the mainstream adoption. It's got to have like standardized things. Like, to be honest, I think it's going to require like a wallet being built into your Android or Apple phone by default. Like, you've got a crypto wallet there to begin with. And now, things like this, I think it would really require those sort of steps before they start getting lenient, which maybe is a bit bad news, but that's my opinion.
Chris, I think same or similar question to you, or at least a follow on there, because again, you see the ecosystem wide, activity. Is that something you would agree with? Is that something you're seeing other developers that are in your ecosystem talking about, where they're worried about, oh, it's going to get stricter before it gets more lenient? Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think my point of view is I feel like we have a pretty stable foundation now. I don't see Apple updating policies to make things worse than they currently are. I mean, like the current setup is already a pretty high amount of friction. So it's not like the current setup is necessarily lenient, right? And I think the way they've structured the guidelines right now protect the fundamental things they want to protect, which are things like making sure you're using IAP in the right way and so on. So I feel like we can pretty reliably build now, just knowing that, hey, we have this set of constraints, and the guys here on this panel are doing great work in terms of figuring out smooth user experiences around those frameworks. And I'm really confident that as this year progresses, that we'll have more and more mobile games launch on the App Store, kind of get through the review process. And we all get to learn from those experiences, right? We get to go reference those games and figure out which ones got through and got approved. And the more and more that we go through that cycle together, the better we'll be able to just kind of like nail down like what's the optimal setup that we should all be kind of leveraging to operate on these mobile platforms. So I think, if I had to bet, I would say we'll probably see a stable point of view from the platforms now that they've kind of issued some guidance. I don't think Apple will make it any harder than it already is. I don't think they're going to make it easier either. I think they've kind of just hit here's the rule set, and we're going to stick to it. Google maybe perhaps takes a different path. Who knows? Because maybe there's an opportunity for them to differentiate a bit and be more welcoming. So we'll have to see on that front. I mean, I think it'll be really cool to see the Saga phone come out from Solana, and just to like at least experience a phone OS that is fully Web3 first and is like actually enabling all the stuff that we would love to do in an ideal state. And maybe that'll just create like this nice little reference for the bigger platforms, long term to kind of just draw some inspiration from. In terms of the other question you asked on just regulatory activity, SEC, and so on, I think like that is challenging short term for the space, but I'm hopeful that what we're going to get over the course of this year is just regulatory clarity, which is what I think everyone's been waiting for. Is like, all right, just tell us exactly what you can and can't do, and give us some really clear guidelines so we can all follow it. And in some ways, it just reminds me of like coming from mobile free to play. We've had to spend many years now collectively figuring out all this privacy stuff around IDFA and just different privacy regulations. Like every country and region's got their own unique set of privacy laws that you need to comply with. And so Web3 is so early that we're just now going through the first stages of the Web3 version of that. That's the kind of discovery to get to a more clear kind of regulatory framework. So I think ultimately it'll be good for the space. Like I think by the end of the year, we hopefully all feel much more clear in terms of what you can and can't do with things like fungible tokens and staking and so on. So there's work to be done in the short term, but hopefully it leads us to a state of ultimately what everyone here is craving, which is like clear rules, whether it's from a platform, from government bodies. And now that we have those, we can kind of build more confidently.
Amen, brother. Yes, some clarity would be nice, and not having to constantly be shooting at a moving target. With shifting quicksand below us. You mentioned the Saga phone, which I actually wanted to talk about anyway. So I'm glad you brought it up. For those who aren't familiar in our listenership, Solana is building an actual phone. It's an Android OS phone. It's a pretty high-end device, about $1,000, I think, retail price. They're releasing dev models right now. We've ordered some. We as a team are building on Solana, and we're waiting for our dev devices. I had Colleen Nimkar, who's at the Solana Foundation, really great guy, really plugged into especially the Solana ecosystem. And he was on the pod maybe 3 or 4 weeks ago, and he was answering some questions about what Saga's meant to do and what it's not meant to do. They are not anticipating it's going to be a massive, seller in the sense that like it's going to sell millions and hundreds of millions of devices. But what they are looking to do, and they're hoping to showcase, is what a Web3 native or Web3 enabled hardware experience would be, where you integrate hardware and software, and especially the wallet experience in particular, which right now, of course, we all agree is absolutely miserable for any non-Web3 degen. So I'm curious to hear, and again, the idea is that right now everybody has this, mobile device, this incredibly powerful computing device in their pocket, and we're all playing games on it and doing our day-to-day activities. But anything that touches Web3 or is crypto native, it's a second-class citizen, right? At best, it's an afterthought. At worst, it's actually blocked by Apple and Google. So I'm very curious to hear your guys' thoughts. I buy the argument. I buy the logic that Solana is putting out there. Do you think it's a game changer? Is it going to move the needle? Is it going to make Google and Apple think about, here's this, device that sold thousands, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of units, maybe? Is that going to change their thinking at all? Is it going to open their eyes to this is what we're doing wrong. Here's how, these Web3 enabled experiences should work. Or is it just not going to feature on their radar? Very curious to hear your guys' thoughts.
No, that would be my answer. Sorry. I'd like to believe it, but I mean, it's just not enough of a sample size, plenty of other people have tried to make phones like Amazon, Windows, so Microsoft, right? And they couldn't even succeed or get them to take notice or do things that they were doing. So I don't give it much hope, especially as unfortunately for Solana, that because it's, related to FTX, I don't think that's, going to help it either. That's beyond their control. That's not their fault. But that's, no, that's my TLDR.
Benas?
Yeah, I fully agree. Actually, on the same note of Anil, it's all about adoption, and Web3 gaming community is still very little, or at least overall Web3 community. I mean, it's not yet reached mass adoption. You need adoption for your phone in order for that to make the needle, and in order for other platforms to start seeing it as a threat, because that's what makes them shift things from the current business where we are, because we're right now sitting very comfortably in their current state, and you have multiple platforms out there coming up with various, with even better deals for studios and publishers to publish on their on their platforms. But again, it's not moving that much of the needle. So yeah.
Yeah, I've sadly, even though we're building on Solana, I think I agree with you guys.
I'll just add, I don't think it's going to move the needle in terms of Apple and Google and so on carrying. But I do think it's really cool, and I think it actually where it couldn't move the needle is just within the Web3 native community, because I wouldn't underestimate the power of a Web3 native Solana community that starts to use this phone. There are entire businesses that can be built on that community, just given the value that's in that community. So I think it might create a very unique ecosystem that could present big business opportunities for certain types of businesses that are really deep in these Web3 native communities. But I would agree, I don't see Apple and Google taking any interest in what's going to happen there anytime soon.
Fair enough. This is for you, Chris. So we've all been, kind of talking about this issue, which is, we need that mass market adoption. It's the classic flywheel, chicken and egg, whatever analogy you want to use. But in order to get, great Web3 games or Web3 powered games, that incorporate some of the concepts about digital ownership or tokenized economies or other aspects of Web3, you need to have that first mega hit, right? We had Axia, which was very GameFi, which is very, pyramid shaped, shall we say, in terms of what it looked like and why people were engaging with that. More recently, we've had, Dookie Dash, which is a very casual game, but it's really catering very much to that Bored Ape community, a very small group of holders. And it's going after that approach of okay, we're going to make our existing holders care more about this ecosystem, but it's definitely not mass market. And I think all four of us here share, I think, a conviction that in order to get to the next level, we can't just be catering to the same Web3 degens or a GameFi, kind of extractive model of an economy. We need to make great, fun games that are just fun to play, but that incorporates some elements of what makes Web3 interesting for game design, for gamers, right? And so this is really it's a question for all of you, but I'm going to start with Chris, just because you kind of occupy this marketplace / ecosystem level place. What do you see the role of somebody like a Magic Eden or an OpenSea, or even somebody like a Solana or a Polygon or Forte? These are ecosystem players of various types trying to move the ball forward, which we all appreciate. Concretely, what can you do? What are you doing in order to help push this mass market to mobile gaming, Web3 gaming enabled ball forward?
Yeah, great question. I guess the way I think about it is that there's two directions that we need to think about. One is like bringing mass market gamers gradually into Web3 enabled games, and both Blast Royale and Shadowpoint, as we've heard on this panel, like they're being very thoughtful about that and creating like these really smooth pathways where if I'm a normal mobile gamer that doesn't want to interact with anything Web3, I can totally play these games and never even think about that. So that's like in that direction, kind of pulling mainstream audiences into these games seamlessly. And where Magic Eden, I think, plays and other ecosystem players in Web3 is actually in the other direction, which is pulling these more Web3 native communities and helping build strong Web3 audiences within these games. Because the ideal marriage is you kind of pull in from both sides. You pull in the Web3 native community that's really comfortable transacting around NFTs and crypto, and really comfortable kind of building these more Web3 native communities in places like Discord and other common forums. And they kind of help the mainstream user who starts to gradually move into the Web3 space. Like when they make that move, there's all of a sudden like this really vibrant Web3 native community that's there to welcome them, to help them kind of get ramped up. And so I think that's the role we play here, is like helping games like the folks in this panel who we're working with through things like our Launchpad, which helps drive mints. And we drive mints, both paid mints and also free mints, that we talked about earlier, is this great strategy to build community around. And so I think we can play that role over these next several years. Is there's this super high value Web3 community. We can bring those audiences into these games in a really smooth and successful way, and to make sure that kind of nucleus is strong, so that as all these games start to bring in the more mainstream players, there is a strong community there to help them get onboarded and to welcome them and to help them troubleshoot or whatever else, whatever challenges they have. And so we're going to be heavily investing in sort of that social and community layer at Magic Eden to connect all these Web3 gamers with each other, and hopefully over time just help onboard more and more mainstream players into that community.
The bi-directional piece, I think, is key. There's a push and a pull, and the ecosystem players, obviously, in my opinion, have a responsibility and a vested interest, of course, in trying to do everything they can to kind of open things up. But then ultimately, I think a lot of it is on the developers, right? It's on the folks who are actually building games and making fun, engaging, entertaining experiences. This is kind of a follow-on question. This is for our developers here on this panel. We've seen umming and ahhing from the larger game, developers, right? So it's mostly indie stuff right now, like smaller studios taking experiments, trying to move pretty quickly. Not AAA, triple I is something that Colleen over at Solana called it. I.e., high quality indie games to figure out what works in Web3. What role do you guys, the developers on this panel, what do you think is the role of the larger developers? The EAs of the world, or the huge publishers, Activision, Blizzards. Like some have, and this is going back a year plus now. Some had mentioned that they might integrate NFTs, and then they saw a huge backlash from their existing gaming communities. Of course, this is no different to free to play. When that first came out, there was a lot of angst about that and a lot of anger and upset, and now it's the predominant mode for playing games. Very interested to hear how you guys are thinking about it's both competition, but it's also helping move this frontier forward. It's very hard for an indie developer or even a large group of indie developers to carry the load on their shoulders because they don't have the budget, they don't have the marketing, they don't have the awareness. So what's going to move the needle, so to speak, on kind of really getting this Web3 enabled games into public consciousness, into like, I get this notion of ownership, or I get that this is a tokenized economy versus a closed, walled garden economy. How much of that will have to come from larger developers, and how much can be pushed forward through the indie community, which I proudly represent, and I'm sure you guys do too.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's a long question, but it's really about the roles and responsibilities of we heard from the ecosystem players like what Magic Eden and folks like that are doing. What's the lift for the indies versus the giants?
I'll go on. You go, Ben.
So I can jump in. I think my point of view is that all of the bigger players, they're waiting for the PAPs to be made. And all of the smaller developers are right now experimenting with a lot of stuff, right? All of us, most of us on this panel, right, are experimenting with various mechanics, Web3 integration layers, hard, soft, NFT and NFT mechanics. How do we distribute them through play to earn, play and own, free to own? We don't yet know what that model is, and a lot of bigger developers, we have a very sustainable business right now taking place, and for them to shift their big ship takes a lot of time, and we need to have a very clear strategy towards which direction we are shifting that ship and directing it forward, while all of the smaller indie developers right now are experimenting. And I think we still are yet to see more games, quality games, come out into the market, because we haven't really seen much to develop a casual or mid-core like game. It takes multiple years. And Anil knows that very well, right? As we have been also developing in stealth for almost a year and a half, and we are just entering closed alpha, which takes a lot of time. And by knowing that there was a lot of quality studios coming into the space back towards the end of 2022, we're still yet to see those engaging, fun gameplay experiences which are coming out. But my point of view, at least from what we are building here at Block Games and with the Shadowpoint game, is that you need to hide NFT abbreviations. You need to also hide most of the blockchain abbreviations, because majority of the gamers, majority of the population, we don't care what chain the game is built on. Neither we don't want to learn what NFT is, because that's a term for the technology, but that's not how we call like assets as NFTs in the gameplay, because that doesn't bring any understanding on what benefits do those assets bring. And it's all about that communication of the benefits, which we need to be very careful, which we articulate within gameplay experiences or platforms, which then can help drive that additional adoption. And the successes which we will see probably in the years to come will be those who will learn how to communicate carefully and build their communication strategies carefully for onboarding and educating users, or communicating to users the benefits like Web3 features which we are integrating or bringing back to them. So that's my 2 cents on what really takes mobile gaming to go mainstream, while bigger players are waiting for the directions.
I agree with all of that, but I think there's actually another direction, and not so many think of that's quite applicable. At the moment in the games industry, innovation is not rife at all. And the reason why innovation is not rife is because it's too expensive to innovate. It's better to make a Call of Duty game than to make a new IP, because if you have to spend $100 million making a brand new AAA game and it fails, a lot of people are going to go out of business and a lot of studios are going to get closed. I also think that in mobile too, marketing is like the elephant in a room that scares everybody, right? ATT changes, privacy means how do you market? So maybe I should have actually said this in an earlier section, but I think it's relevant to here. But one of the things that really appealed to us is we feel that like the Web3 angle is maybe a new attack vector that you have as a new studio that you can use. And more importantly, I think it's an angle that you can use that you can only use if you're indie, and not so much if you're an established AAA. So the thing is that, if you can try and go with something innovative or new, and you can get your super fans in really early. And if they believe it, they're going to be virally making the game bigger and bigger. And they have a vested interest in doing that because they were in early. They own the assets. They were cool. Hey, do you remember with Shadowpoint when Niko joined the server on day 3 and he's now like the biggest mod in the community, etc., etc. This is like really cool stuff that you can get to. And I think that this is why it's interesting, is because that may actually give indie developers a way to succeed in a world where right now it's looking like you can't succeed. Because right now in mobile, mobile has actually dropped in terms of year-on-year revenues by 5%. It's like the first time we've seen consolidation. A lot of that is due to like sort of post-COVID effect. 1 year everyone was playing nothing but games because there was nothing to do, and then people realized you could go outside again. Turns out going outside is kind of cool. But then on top of that, you've also got World War III sort of starting in Eastern Europe, and meaning that like energy prices have gone up and people are not spending so much. So perhaps there's a kind of a caveat there. But point is that that's meant that, like, acquisitions are slowing down. Mobile games are not, perceived. It's not seen as startups can create a space where they could do 5 years ago, where anyone, if they had a strong team, could maybe do it. And so that's why I think Web3 could change two things. And I think as well, perhaps where AAA, bringing it back to your question, what they might learn though is how can you de-risk a project? Because that's the thing. I don't actually believe that AAA developers don't want to make new things. It's just that if you're the guy that has to sign the check on the dotted line, you're not going to choose the thing that's going to be risky. You've got to keep the business afloat, or you've got to have your expectations to shareholders and so on and so forth. So, one thing I think that's great about Web3 is that before even making your game, you can kind of see if your community is buzzing or not, right? If like thousands, millions of people are coming in and they're interested on day one, that's probably a game that's worth making. If it's just tumbleweed in your Discord server, like that's a good way for you to acknowledge yourself that maybe your idea doesn't have product marketing fit and you have to move on to the next one. And so I think these are the interesting things. So look, again, I think it's kind of like the really great thing about Web3 is like we kind of know a little bit of things that worked in the past, but how can you like change it from being skeuomorphic and thinking about what kind of crazy stuff can we do, where can we do it, and work it out as soon as possible. And yeah, that's why I actually do have to say that one thing I think that's funny in Web3 is I think sometimes people are guilty of overthinking it. Like they're thinking of these really super sophisticated solutions and all these things. I'm like, dude, have you not played games? Like most games are like you shoot someone in the head or you slap them in the head with your fist, right? Or, they're like people just want to be entertained. They really do not care about your next level on-chain, off-chain, yada, yada, yada. Like, that stuff can come later. Maybe I'm too basic in thinking that, but I do have to say sometimes I feel like when I'm talking to other people in Web3, I'm thinking that like, why am I speaking to Albert Einstein when your target demographic is just like some, 13-year-old kid who likes playing on his PlayStation 5, I don't know, maybe that's like a little bit of a caveat that I've got there. But yes, I think that actually, but Ben's right. Like basically, let's be honest, right? When big games start making big revenues, they're going to buy studios and learn how to do it. I admit that's kind of like what we could see an exit angle for us, although it's not the only one. But I think that there's other things that will be discovered. And you said this many times, Niko, we're early in Web3. That's the most exciting thing. I don't know about you guys, but for me, when this came along, I was like, actually, wow, why it's so exciting is that this is a completely blue ocean. Nothing's been worked out. I bet the solutions that get figured out in years to come, they'll seem simple, but right now we just can't see them. There'll be things like this. And I love that kind of thing. It like really gets us excited. Probably tell like the passion in my voice about it as a result. Yeah, that's my thoughts.
Yeah, I mean, I couldn't agree more. I think that's there's a lot of skepticism around Web3 and crypto, and some of it perfectly warranted and deserved, quite frankly. But what is if you want to kind of take a 30,000-foot view, forest for the trees kind of situation, is like, well, it unlocks a lot of really cool stuff, right? And we haven't yet figured out what all that cool stuff is. But it's there for the taking, right? And that's really, to your point, Anil, about like, what is one of the things that actually gives indies an edge over the big incumbents is the fact that they can take risks. They can do things that the big guys can't do. They simply cannot risk it, or it's too small for them to consider at that moment in time. And that actually can really unlock an edge for the indie developer. And for those early communities who form around it, right? Because they're super passionate, right? Like that's the one thing about Web3 is like the communities are real. Like that's not fake. That's not a Ponzi. Like the communities are absolutely 100% real, and they form in ways that I have not seen in my career in gaming in such passionate form and such intense form. They may be small still compared to your kind of traditional, big game communities, if you will, but they're much more tight-knit. They're much more passionate, in my opinion. So anyway, I think there was some great thoughts, some great passion there to end on. I think we're about time as well. So I just want to say a huge, huge thank you to all of you guys. It was a really, really good panel. Some really good thoughts and insights. And I just want to say thank you, Anil. Thank you, Chris.
Yeah, thanks for having us. Really fun conversation here.
And thank you, Benas.
Thank you so much. Yeah, it was really fun.
And I also want to say a big thank you to all of our listeners. We will be back next week with more interviews, more insights, and more analysis from the weird and wonderful world of Web3. So until next time, friends, stay crypto curious and feel free to send questions, guest recommendations, and comments to me. My email is nico@naavik.co, and you can always find me on Twitter @NicoTheFin. DMs open. Thank you, everyone. Till next time.
If you enjoyed today's episode, whether on YouTube or your favorite podcast app, make sure to like, subscribe, comment, or give a 5-star review. And if you want to reach out or provide feedback, shoot us a note at podcast@naavik.co or find us on Twitter and LinkedIn. Plus, if you want to learn more about what Naavik has to offer, make sure to check out our website, www.naavik.co. There, you can sign up for the #1 games industry newsletter, Naavik Digest, level up your insights with our premium research platform, Naavik Pro, or contact us to learn about our wide-ranging consulting and advisory services. Again, that is www.naavik.co. Thanks for listening, and we'll catch you in the next episode.